In the middle of a barrage of fierce snow lay the lifeless body of a woman, the silhouette of which hid the sad story of her former life. No one knew how long she had already managed to lie motionless in the same place, gradually dying from the terrible cold. By the time she found herself in this situation, she had absolutely no one left among her friends and family who was alive and able to save her. The ice lady wasn't the only one who was in the middle of the ice plain today, so a man approached her. He knew her history and only noticed aloud the absurdity of how shamelessly she had been left to die in this cold kingdom. The man could not leave her in such a situation, so he came closer and addressed her, calling her the Empress. She looked at him with a detached look as he began to say that since she didn't want her own life, he would gladly take her. In the end, the man took her in his arms after she looked at him and recognized an acquaintance, and then tiredly closed her eyes. Holding her head in his hand and looking haughtily into her eyes, he said that she now belonged to him. The fate of the Empress was tragic throughout her life, but the main fatal events arose 3 months ago. For a long period of time, Natasha, the Emperor's mistress, tried in every possible way to persuade him to conspire against his wife. Like a serpent tempter, she put her arm around his shoulders, whispering a secret plan for how he could consolidate his power. Her words have a strange effect on him, so he grins maliciously when he hears that his power has been taken away by the Empress. Everything in the lands of the Thanatos Empire was supposed to belong to Emperor Gigliotti, but his wife was an exception. She was so skilled in political and diplomatic affairs that Gigliotti became her shadow and no longer wielded so much power. Natasha continued to incite him, offering to leave her the Empress's brother so that she could deal with him. Her insidious plan was to try to seduce and accuse him of brutal rape. The Emperor's mistress was a member of the Imperial Council, so such a crime would definitely put an end to his life. She runs her hand perceptibly over his torso and knows that this will ruin the Empress's reputation when she tries to protect him. Natasha snuggles up to his back and claims that by covering for her criminal brother, the woman will become vile in the eyes of the public. The final cross on the man's position will be put by the evidence of high treason he committed in his office. Then, during a search of his property, a letter will be found, which will say that he did this out of his sister's hatred for Natasha and His Majesty. After giving him her brilliant plan, the blonde woman strokes her cheek with the man's hand and asks him to do something for her before that. To his surprise, her caress is replaced by unpredictable rudeness, so she presses his hands to the bed in an instant. Climbing on top of him, she enthusiastically tells him to break the Empress's limbs before carrying out the main part of the plan. Next, she demands to get rid of all the people dear to her, including family members, faithful servants, and inner circle. The final part will be when the woman comes to the banquet hall to appear before His Majesty without suspecting anything. Pressing the Emperor into bed, the mistress says that she will appear in front of all the guests and inform them about her child from the Emperor. According to her calculations, this will be the last time a woman will appear in Thanatos as an empress for one criminal reason. Because of her brother's crimes and her own jealousy, she will try to get rid of the Emperor's mistress and her child. Gigliotti has little understanding of what she says because of his concentration on the one act of adultery with her. Without stopping, Natasha says that after the deeds of the Empress, he will be obliged to draw his sword in order to kill her and her family. Touching the neck of the Emperor, drowning in pleasure, she remarks with a smile that her rival will need to be very cunning in order not to be found. The girl calculatingly notes that after she is left alone, it will not matter how smart and resourceful she is. After some time, the 17th Empress Thanatos found herself on the verge of a new sad branch of her difficult fate. By that time, not without the help of the Emperor, she had become lame and could only move with the help of a cane. Sunset Rosalind V was considered the most noble, beautiful, and ideal empress in the history of the empire. She was not only a brilliant writer, but also an ideal diplomat while speaking 6 languages. In addition, she often opened new medical institutions, sincerely caring for the sick and poor representatives of society. Rosalind was known as a loving and kind empress because she could often stay among the beds of the sick for hours, supporting them. Despite her limp, everyone loved the cold beauty Rosalind and did not dare to point the finger at the ruler's illness. The only man who did not share the universal love and recognition was the infamous emperor. His progressive hatred was influenced by many factors, including the fact that they had not had children for a long time. Rosalind stood quietly in the hallway, realizing that this man had impudently destroyed all her followers, including her relatives. Her maid watched Rosalind anxiously as she lost her dark thoughts as she thought she was not going to give up. The girl truly felt sorry for Rosalind, because fragments of how she returned immediately appeared in her memory, even despite the broken leg. That day, despite the fatal injury, she continued to calmly convince the maid that everything was fine with her and she was alive. Looking at the Empress's back, she cannot get used to understanding how cruel fate is to her. Rosalind hears music coming from the next room, which is a banquet hall, as if inviting you to join in. She froze in front of the door to the ill-fated room, not even knowing what exactly awaited her there. The Empress turns when she hears the girl behind her addressing her anxiously. At first, she is anxiously silent, trying to squeeze out of her chest at least a couple of words that she was going to say. Sensing her uneasiness, Rosalind tried to convince her that she was okay and asked her to open the door for them. Obviously, this conversation is extremely difficult for the girl, so she almost breaks down into a scream, saying that she will be with her until the very end. Rosalind interrupted her, but her anxiety still made her think of her loved ones, who had died due to illness and other incidents. She knows perfectly well that the Emperor is to blame for all deaths, including the death of the Minister of Internal Affairs, her favorite maid, and others. Looking at Anna clutching her fist to her chest, she mentally notices that she is the last of those who remained with her, and she cannot lose her. Trying to put on as calm an expression as possible, she orders her to leave without hesitation if anything happens to her. Anna begins to cry when she says that she has prepared everything she needs in a safe place at the beach house. At first, she frantically refuses, but realizing that the Empress only wants to protect her, she still leaves her. Her address brings a smile to the Empress's face, as she has not heard of being addressed by her name Rosie for a long time. Anna insists that Rosalind wait a few days for the help of the Earl, who is working to save the Sunset family. Like Anna, this conversation is extremely difficult for the Empress, but she still pulls herself together and with a soft smile asks to open the door. Unable to argue with the woman any longer, she nevertheless opens the doors to the room for her, which will become her personal hell. Finally, Rosalind walks forward and finds herself in the middle of a noisy hall, surrounded by an abundance of guests and loud music. Next, she finds herself right in front of her main hater, who proudly sits on the throne at the moment of her arrival. Gigliotti notes tensely that even despite the injury, she still walked through the banquet hall with her firm gait. Their eyes meet when he mentally calls her creepy, noticing the woman's impenetrable gaze. He decides to sarcastically ask how she was able to walk to the banquet hall with her sore leg, looking haughtily into her eyes. Rosalind is not going to give in to him, so she mocks him, saying that if her leg does not bend, it does not mean that she cannot walk. A woman's remark in response definitely provokes the desired reaction, so he only grins evilly, mentally calling him a witch. Their skirmish does not pass by the ears of two men, one of whom is the foreign minister of the enemy country of Amor. He is surprised that despite all the sticks put in her wheels, she still attended this event. Meanwhile, the skirmish between the man and the woman reaches a climax when she drives him to a rage with her smug statement. Despite the fact that Rosalind has a clear primacy in their conflict, she understands that she will still be the one who falls today. She sadly remembers her family doing their best to protect a family heirloom passed down from generation to generation. She is interrupted by the unexpected appearance of Natasha Roanti, who intends to put an end to this bloody chess game. Like a bloody rose bringing death, she approaches the Empress, shocked by her impudent appearance. Looking ingratiatingly into Rosalind's eyes, she shamefully covers herself with a fan and asks to be punished, at first without giving a reason. They find themselves in the middle of a spacious hall, where Natasha says that her brother would not do this to her if she said that she was carrying His Majesty's child. Her statement instantly shocked all the distinguished guests, who could not believe what she said for a long time. Rosalind was similarly taken aback by this news, which now made her feel a deep sense of resentment and anger. She looked at Natasha murderously when she continued to play shamelessly, pretending that she was sorry and guilty. Without hesitation, she touches the Empress's hand to approach and takes steps to implement her plan. She smiles insidiously and unfolds her fan, where she hid the prepared bloody knife which became the weapon of the attack. Finally, Natasha Rwanti falls to the floor, which causes deep surprise to the Empress, who does not even have time to understand where the knife came from in her hand. She only lies lifeless on the floor, imitating how blood is rapidly spilling from her stomach due to the wound. Like a bloody rose, she silently demonstrates to everyone around her how deep her simulated wound is. The rest of the guests immediately ran to the scene of the crime, being in the same ignorance as the Empress herself. Both Minister Amora and his assistant were similarly shocked at how cleverly they had framed Rosalind using such a clever trick. His eyes widen rapidly in surprise when he sees how everyone is worried about Natasha's health and thinks Rosalind is a villain. Meanwhile, the sitting emperor only mentally rejoices that the woman has finally been caught, while hiding his grin. He contributes to the development of this performance and furiously explodes from his seat, expressively waving his arms in search of soldiers. Meanwhile, the Empress, having heard the order to use weapons against the criminal, stood quietly, as if lowered into the water. At her feet lay her husband's bloody mistress, who had achieved the complete collapse of the Empress's power. A satisfied smile played on the victim's face, caused by how deftly she managed to carry out her sinister plan. After the order came to surround the Empress and help the victim, everyone continued to stand around the bright blood stain. With a malicious bark, Gigliotti announced the end of the banquet, openly calling for people to leave the scene. Eventually, Rosalind found herself in complete isolation in a country that she had served with dedication and love all her life. Amour's delegation was beside itself with indignation, realizing that the woman could die before she could survive this winter. As expected, the Empress was already in the dungeon, guarded by stern guards. Having thrown her into prison, the Emperor tortured her for a long time, trying in vain to find out the whereabouts of the family heirloom. Knowing about his intentions, and despite the hellish pain brought by the most sophisticated tortures, the woman never gave away her secret. She was beaten on the back with a whip, her nails were pulled out with pliers, and mercilessly beaten until her body began to sink in blood. Meanwhile, outside the palace, rumors reached the people, which provoked a riot, the main goal of which was her freedom. A bunch of ordinary people and followers of the Empress begged the Emperor for mercy. He only stared at them coldly from the height of his balcony, watching as more and more people joined the protest. His face literally glows with indignation because he really thought that their strike would subside in a few days. The poor woman was mercilessly hung by her hands, preparing for the implementation of Gigliotti's new brilliant plan. Her clothes were a solid rag, drenched in the blood of a barefoot martyr, of whose beauty only long hair remained. After being unconscious, she woke up again from how cruelly she was doused with ice water. Her tormented eyes opened, and she saw a satisfied emperor in front of her, brazenly crossing his arms over his chest. Like two polarities, their eyes met as he began to talk about how he had never learned anything from her. They hear the pleas of the inhabitants surrounding the building with a clear demand to release the unfortunate woman. Looking at her beaten face, but not losing her pride, he informs her that he will save her life, for which she should be grateful. Eventually, he turns to two executioners, ordering her to be deported to the icy mountains of Krolturia. This is not the only thing that her ex-husband has prepared for her, so he attracts her attention by showing her two chests. Proudly presenting his gift, he throws two heads belonging to Rosalind's deceased parents, which causes shock. At first, it is difficult for her to come to terms with what has happened, so she freezes silently, feeling her ability to breathe slip away. Screaming hysterically to the entire dungeon, she furiously pronounces his name, making a tangible leap forward. The woman is immediately stopped by two unscrupulous servants, pressing her head to the floor with a sharp stick pressing on her head. Gigliotti is clearly enjoying the open spectacle, snidely watching her face take on an uncharacteristic expression. Forcibly pinned to the floor, she looks at him furiously, promising that she will never forgive him for it again. Meanwhile, near the neighborhood was the same man, dressed in black like a warlike horseman of the apocalypse. He looked around the city in front of him, thinking that it was time to go back instead of standing there. The man feels a strong feeling of anger growing in him, caused by the overthrow of the Empress of an enemy country. Trying to comprehend the reason for such feelings, he looked at the tower, confident that he would destroy it with his own hands someday. The red-haired man interrupted his lonely thoughts, approaching him from behind while sitting on his horse. At first, he didn't understand what exactly Tamon was looking at, but then he saw the courtyard of Thanatos behind the man. A sly grin lit up his face as he thought that recent events might have affected his comrade after all. He decided to influence the course of events, so he touched Tamon, casually talking about where the Empress was deported. Without waiting for any reaction from the silent man, he only said that he was very sorry that this happened. Memories of their meetings immediately arose in Tamon's mind when his comrade spoke of how superior she was to the others. Tacitly agreeing that such a woman as she must not be lost, the minister pulls on the reins sharply, turning his horse around. The red-haired comrade does not have time to come to his senses, as Tamon is far enough, without explaining where he is going. Rushing forward, he only hears the cry of his companion trying to figure out his direction. Meanwhile, the Empress lay serenely in the middle of the piles of snow, mentally cursing Gileadi for such a death. Images of her loved ones appear before her eyes, who were killed by the Emperor, making her suffer from the fact that she could not protect them. She is trying to understand where she took a wrong turn, because all this time she was trying to become a good ruler and protect her loved ones. Her readiness to go to the other world was interrupted by a man who suddenly appeared, slowing down a meter away from her. In a hurry, he began to approach her, thinking about what a ridiculous death had been prepared for such a majestic woman. When he got very close, he sat down beside him, convulsively thinking about why she had been born in Thanatos. He also didn't understand why this woman would have to be around such a spawn as the current emperor who had killed her. Tamon watches as her already lifeless eyes slowly begin to close, losing touch with the surrounding reality. The man impulsively hugs his stiff body, eating himself up with thoughts of why he didn't find her first. Holding her head, he said aloud that if she didn't need this life, he would gladly take it. He gently runs his finger along the corners of her lips, going down to her cheeks, after which he instantly presses himself to his lips, calling her his own. Their history of mankind is not so simple, because once God, subject to curiosity, collected materials for the creation of man. Gradually adding different emotions, he was pleased with the process, but still wanted to fill the future creature with kindness. To his regret, as soon as he turned away, the devil jumped into the cauldron, which had its consequences. As a result, the people who appeared at every step were at the crossroads of good and evil. They could attack others over trifles, start wars for no reason, and not show their good sides by killing each other. Upon learning of this, the supreme god became angry and tore the creator of mankind to pieces, punishing him for the imbalance he had created. Scattering its parts across the earth, he gave birth to the 6 elements of the deity, sealed into objects imbued with the power of the elements. The rest of the particles penetrated the human mind, endowing them with various supernatural abilities. Tamon is endowed with the power of life, so he kissed Rosalind in order to breathe his power into her, while giving a part of himself. As he hurried back to the camp, he held the Empress's body in his arms, not believing that he had ever been able to touch her. He believes that in any case he has already taken her with him, so she will definitely live even after what happened to her. Meanwhile, his comrade was already busy accommodating the crew in a new snowy area, creating a temporary point. The man watched with irony as his warriors shivered from the cold, thinking about how the inhabitants of the empire lived in such cold. Having reached the settlement, Tamon immediately attracted all his attention to himself, appearing with the Empress in his arms. Not reacting in any way to the man's indignation, he immediately walked past him, covering his companion with a sheepskin coat. After a couple of seconds, his puzzled friend could only turn around and see the curtain swaying after his arrival. He is overwhelmed with surprise when he finally realizes the absurdity of the act of the minister who kidnapped the Empress. As he carried the weakened Rosalind to the bed, he stopped, inwardly glad that she was finally safe. By the time he put her to bed, she was already unconscious and did not immediately feel the radical change of scenery. Having coped with his fatal mission, the man sat down next to him and thought hard, watching the sleeping Empress. Looking at her exhausted look, he only remembered how majestic she had looked during their last negotiations. At the time, Amor tried to secure the transfer of the island in exchange for protection from pirates, but Rosalind immediately figured out all the unfavorable aspects of the offer. Tamon smiled impudently, trying to convince her of the insignificance of their possible losses, but she was an unbreakable diplomat. He proposed another island and immediately presented her with one of the options, which betrayed his true motives and goals. The Empress knew that in the area of this island, the ship of the country of Amor had previously been wrecked, having lost the necessary jewels. Deftly manipulating her opponent, she insisted that there were very valuable things that his country needed. His face immediately lit up with a disgruntled grimace as she announced that the property had already been raised on land by her family. Finally, she swore to return everything only in exchange for Amor's trade, exclusive rights to the red cocoon. He stood over her like a sin on his soul, remembering how she had bargained for rare rights to a resource grown only in Amor. The minister recalls how she annoyed him and found fault with him, without losing her courage and elegance in doing so. Observing the reactions of her body, he noticed that she was gradually becoming more and more feverish, calling for his help. He thought for a moment, thinking about how the Empress's condition could be improved. Remembering the previous touch of their lips on the snowy plain, he suggested that the power transmitted then might not be enough. Wrapping his arm around her back, Tamon thought about how she had been the enemy he had wanted to destroy on the diplomatic front. Pulling the exhausted, fragile body to him, he could not figure out why he could not bear her pain. Wrapping his arms around her lips again, he repeated the procedure of transferring his life force in order to somehow improve her condition. Feeling a surge of energy and incomprehensible sensations in her mouth, Rosalind opened her eyes and saw the man's closed eyes. Realizing what was going on, she instantly recoiled from him, as if scalded, hitting him on the cheek with her palm. Looking into his eyes dumbfounded, she still managed to squeeze out a question about what he was doing, receiving the answer that he was treating her. Arguments about treatment were clearly not enough, so she demanded that he return her back to the icy mountain. At first, she was taken aback when he said that he wanted to see her alive, and then grabbed her wrist, listening to the request to let her die. The man looked at her as if she were an alien, not understanding why she spoke so much about her life. He looked at her tortured hands while listening to the words that after everything that had happened to her, she did not want to live. The Empress understood that now she had neither loved ones nor a chance to return everything and replay the situation. Clearly not expecting such a thing from her, he loudly asked if she really wanted to die so easily after so many years of service. Deep down, he wanted to hear a negative answer to the end, but the destitute woman did not live up to his expectations. After a few long seconds of silence, she wrapped her slender wrist around his massive arm. Finally, she confirms that she has been his headache for a long time, making him want to step on her throat. Smiling tiredly, she pulls his hand to her throat, closing it on him, begging him for an end in the process. He was struck to the core when Rosalind looked at him pleadingly, urging him not to save her from an imminent death anymore. Tamon himself did not notice how both of his hands were closed on the throat of the woman who was begging so badly that he kill her. The man only tensed perceptibly, realizing that she had really been his headache all along. Without removing his hands, he could feel how thin her neck was, and how quickly it could break if he just pressed with his fingers. With a single movement, he could easily help her close her eyes, which no longer have any will to continue living. The woman's current condition ran counter to the greatness and nobility she displayed during diplomatic negotiations. The former Empress continued to look at him silently with her glassy eyes, causing only sadness with her condition. Finally, he tore his hands away from the woman's neck, refusing to become her weapon of his own murder. Instead, he pulled her broken leg towards him, squeezing it with his massive hand to the complete surprise of the Empress. He further hit her even harder as he brought her limb to his mouth and pressed his lips against it as he began the treatment. She tried to recoil, asking what exactly he was trying to do without first explaining it to her. Without looking up from her shin, he ordered the woman not to twitch, as this could interfere with her treatment. Tamon stops as she begs him to stop, almost begging while looking away. Her bickering made the man very angry, so he was ready to leave since she wanted to, but suddenly broke off in mid-sentence. He impulsively moves closer to her and, almost breaking into a scream, tells her to continue fighting to the very end. Tamon cannot believe that she is as she asks, so he orders her to fight and win not only with him, but also with others. He reminds Rosalind of how majestic she was and insists that she fight to the very end. At that moment, she must have felt that the man believed in her more than she did, even though he had been her enemy before.